In our last tutorial, we looked at the nervous system as a way of picking up stimuli in the environment and appropriately responding to those stimuli so that a living thing could survive successfully. Nerves involve nerve cells called neurons that transmit an electrical signal from the receptors through to the effectors. In many animals and in plants, there's a second system or another system of getting messages from receptors through to effectors so that the organism can live and survive in its environment. And that is through the use of chemical messengers called hormones. This tutorial will focus a little bit on the system that creates the hormones called the endocrine system or endocrine system, and the hormones themselves and how they work. So again, let's put it into the context of the stimulus response model, which we focused on in a previous tutorial. So you remember that in the stimulus response model, there's some stimulus from the environment. It could be the external environment outside the animal or plant, or it could be the internal environment from inside the animal or plant. Some kind of information that is necessary for the organism's survival. That stimulus has to be detected in some way by a receptor or receptors. That receptor then needs to send a message to an effector, that is some part of the organism that's going to carry out a response. And it's this response that you would think will contribute to the survival of that animal or plant in its environment. Now it's the message that we're focusing on here. And as I said, we previously noted that nerves are one way that the message can be transmitted from a receptor to an effector, but the second way, which is the focus of this tutorial, is through chemical messengers called hormones. So let's have a look at what we mean by the endocrine system and hormones. Alright, so let's focus on the endocrine system. By a system here we mean a number of different organs or tissues inside a body that work together to control a particular aspect of the functioning of that organism. In this case, we're talking about a system or collection of different tissues and organs that make hormones that carry different messages to different parts of the body to help regulate and control what's going on. So the endocrine system is made up of a number of endocrine glands. And an endocrine gland is an organ or tissue in an organism that makes hormones. And there are a variety of these organs and tissues in the human body. Some of them are shown on this cartoonish kind of character that we can see on the left here. So inside the brain there are a number of key glands, like the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. You don't need to remember the names of all these organs, but it's worth just hearing them because they're very, very important in your everyday function. So the hypothalamus is a very important endocrine gland. The pituitary gland in the brain is also another gland that makes hormones, very important ones. Just at the base of your neck, there's a gland called the thyroid gland, which is very important in your body because it makes a number of hormones that control your functioning. Sitting on the kidneys down here are the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands make the very famous hormone adrenaline. And there are a number of other glands. There's the pancreas here makes insulin, which helps to control your sugar in your blood, and people who suffer diabetes have a problem with the way they make insulin in their pancreas, and so have to have it regulated in other ways. Your reproductive glands, so ovaries in females and testes in males, both responsible for reproductive hormones like estrogen and testosterone, which control a whole lot of reproductive development. So there's a whole range of these endocrine glands that are responsible for making these hormones. So what then is a hormone? There are a number of different definitions for what a hormone is, but this one here is not a bad one and reasonably straightforward, I think. So a hormone is a chemical messenger. It's made in an endocrine gland in animals or specialised cells in plants, and the hormone then can travel around that organism and bring about a particular response in a target cell or tissue. Now it's important to remember here that hormones don't just act on everything in the body. They only cause some kind of effect in very specialised target cells or tissues. Animals often have specialised endocrine glands, whereas plants tend not to have glands. They tend to have specialised cells that produce these hormones. So in animals, some of the key hormones would be the following. Adrenaline is a key one, which helps to speed up your heart rate, to open up your blood vessels, and to prepare the body to either generally fight a predator or to run away. They often call it the fight or flight response. So adrenaline's a very important hormone. There are hormones such as the reproductive hormones like estrogen, testosterone. There are the blood sugar controlling hormones like insulin and glucagon. There is a very important hormone called thyroxine, which controls how quickly you make energy in the body. In plants, there are hormones such as auxins, which control various parts of plant growth. There's hormones such as ethylene, which control the ripening of fruits. There's hormones called gibberellic acid. There's another hormone called cytokinins. Now you don't need to remember the names of all of these, but this is just to give you a sense that there are lots of different hormones, and there are many, many, many others other than these as well, particularly in animals. But these are some of the key ones. So in your notes, you're required to focus on just 3 hormones: adrenaline, estrogen, and insulin. All right, so these 3 hormones, you're required to take a few notes about each of these and what they do. And you can get this information from the textbook. Let's have a quick look at how one of these hormones work, and that's insulin. Insulin is a hormone that controls how much sugar you have in your blood. If you have too much or too little, this can really affect the way your body works and your health. So your body has to maintain a steady level of sugar in your blood, called the blood glucose level, otherwise you can get very sick. And the people who cannot regulate this blood sugar level are referred to as diabetics. Let's have a look at this graph down here for a moment. So along the dotted line that we can see here, this is what you consider to be the normal blood glucose level. That's the amount of glucose that's in your blood at any moment of the day. That would be what the body can survive with, that normal blood glucose level. After you've eaten a meal particularly full of sugar, you would expect the level of sugar or glucose in your blood to increase, and you can see that here. So presumably there's been a meal eaten just here. So what the body has to do is, if you get an increase in sugar, it actually has to return that back to normal, otherwise you can get very sick. So when there's a high blood glucose level, as in up here, insulin is released. Whoops, make sure I spell that correctly. Insulin's released by the pancreas. And the job of insulin is to turn glucose back into a storage molecule called glycogen. So glucose is turned into glycogen and stored. And this causes the blood glucose level to drop. And it drops back to just below normal, and then it comes back up under the influence of another hormone to around about the normal blood glucose level. So in this way, insulin helps to control when you have too much glucose in the blood. There is another hormone that controls when you have too little glucose in the blood, but we won't worry about looking at that just now. You can see someone who suffers from diabetes, where insulin is not made properly, have trouble regulating their blood glucose. So after a meal, you can see that their blood glucose goes up much higher than a normal person. So you get a very increase here, but they have trouble making insulin, so the blood glucose level takes a long, long time to come back down again. It doesn't come down rapidly, as shown here. And this can cause real problems in diabetics. So diabetics who can't make insulin have to inject insulin into themselves, or they'll have an insulin pump, which is permanently connected into their bloodstream, which will distribute or put insulin into their blood to control their sugar. And if diabetics have too little sugar in their blood, they'll have to eat sugar lollies that can boost up their sugar levels. And so if you know any diabetics, you would know that some of them would carry lollies around so that they can adjust their sugar upwards. So being a diabetic is very difficult, and it's a constant thing through every day of your life until they hopefully one day can find a cure. So this is one illustration of how a very important hormone, insulin, can work. Now let's finish this tutorial by just doing a quick comparison between hormones and nerves. If we were to compare the actions of hormones and nerves in terms of the way they carry a message from a receptor to an effector in the body, this is how we could characterise it. Nerves are very fast, so it's a very fast message because it's an electrical signal that jumps along the axons because of the myelin sheath. So it's very, very fast, but it tends to be very short-lasting too. Hormones, on the other hand, tend to be slower in action. It takes time for the hormones to circulate around a body and to act on their various target organs or tissues or cells. So it tends to be a slower action, and in general it tends to be longer lasting. So in this way, hormone and nerve action can be contrasted. So hormones slower, nerves faster. Hormones longer lasting, nerve action shorter lasting. So hopefully this gives you some sense of the importance of both nerves and hormones in helping to regulate and control the lives of animals and plants in their environments. If these two kinds of message systems were not working, then animals and plants simply couldn't gather information from their environment and they couldn't act accordingly, and so they would die very quickly. So this is why this kind of information is part of this conserving biodiversity unit, because it helps you to understand that the survival of species sometimes can depend on their ability to take in information quickly enough and to respond quickly enough to changes in the environment. And what's going on in their bodies is critically associated with how hormones and nerves work.